like if you select that qualification. And she forgot to tell me that like when you stream, you can't select that it's okay for kids, even if it is, just because of how tight their regulations are. Yeah. Okay. We are live on YouTube. I am going to check the connection now and share the link in the Facebook group.
Caleb, is she full screen on your screen? Because you're small in the middle for some reason on mine.
She's full screen. What, like, I have the participants, I have speaker view on. I don't think it really matters though how she looks on my screen.
Okay, my computer's starting to make sounds, just a heads up.
Okay, it says your bandwidth is low.
Okay, it could be that, and maybe we can actually do this. It says excellent connection in YouTube though, so I don't know.
And you are not choppy. You're doing it. It looks great. So I would just go ahead and it should be great.
Awesome. I just posted it. Welcome everyone, online universe, to our second day of Earth Day Live. Yesterday we had some awesome programming thanks to Lara, who's on this call, and Caleb, and lots of other folks. It was really grounding to hear stories from people very young and older folks, just thinking about why this is so important that we're coming together amidst all of the restrictions that we find ourselves learning to live with now in COVID. And my name is Espoir. For those of you that might not know me, I'm coming to you from unceded Dakota territory in Minnesota. And I am the member of the steering committee for Cumberland Valley Rising, as well as the coordinator of the environmental committee, which is a group that is coordinating an Earth Day event on Saturday. That is Carlisle Celebrates Earth Day. You can find us on Facebook. And it's been super exciting to work with all of the people on this call right now. And we're so glad that you're tuning in today to be here with us. Lara or Caleb, would you like to introduce yourselves before we dive into things?
Sure. I'm Caleb from the Sunrise Movement, specifically the Lancaster chapter. I am the hub coordinator and delegate, and I am working on a special project right now to help hubs across the country work on field.
Sweet.
So I'm Lara, and I have founded the Pennsylvania Climate Strike and love just bringing people together to stand up and create change for the environment. And I've loved working with everyone on the committee. And I forgot to mention yesterday, we had this great Harrisburg stand up, Act Now or Swim Later. That was the Sierra Club funded that. Chloe Salas designed it, and that was really wonderful. And we've done lots of different banner paintings over the months for rallies and stuff. So I'm so happy to be here with you today, and thank you for all you do as well. I think you're muted still, sweetie.
Yeah, thanks. It's always really wonderful working with both of you, and I feel like I've learned so much in terms of all of the things we've all been doing from September last fall in Harrisburg on the Capitol steps to right now in this call all across the state of Pennsylvania and the nation. Today, we're going to be talking about the Green New Deal and the People's Bailout, and Caleb is going to talk to us about that. So thank you again, Caleb, for sharing all of your knowledge from many hours of hard work that you've put in. And then Peter Stone is going to play some music and tell us about Extinction Rebellion. And then I'll talk a little bit about divestment and why it's so important to... Sorry, Johnny is saying that the video isn't on and I'm muted, but I think it's working.
Yes, it's fine. It's fine. Sorry.
I'll talk about divestment potentially, and John will tell us about the PA Power Switch, which is an awesome tool that folks in PA can use to make sure that they're getting renewable energy for their homes. Today is the Stop the Money Pipeline Day as a part of Earth Day Live from US Youth Climate Strike. And that's why we're talking about the economy, the Green New Deal, and why we really can destroy this fake binary that we've created between environment and jobs. And they don't have to go against each other. They need to work together to create a just future and a livable future for all the people that are being most affected right now with COVID, but also the folks who bear the brunt of climate change, Black and Brown communities, Indigenous folks who don't have enough support for all the things that they face. So with that, I think I will pass it over to Caleb if you're ready to tell us a little bit about the Green New Deal and the People's Bailout. I'm really excited to learn more about all this.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation and overview of kind of the COVID-19 crisis we're in right now, the immediate solution being the People's Bailout, and then the more long-term solution to not only the climate crisis, but to our broken economic system and our broken healthcare system, and just many of the broken systems in our country. So to begin, I'm just going to overview the crisis and framing the moment we're in. So we know that the U.S. was woefully and still is woefully unprepared to deal with this crisis. In early 2018, Trump disbanded the essentially the preparedness team for pandemics, and essentially that would help us detect pandemics starting in other countries and preparing us to deal with it. And he disbanded it. And early on, he took the crisis not so seriously. He said multiple times that, there'd be a few cases, no big deal. It's mostly contained within China. We don't have to deal with it. And that essentially within the next few months, the crisis would be over and we could, go back to work and there'd be no real economic repercussions. However, we know that's not the case. And at one point in, the past few weeks, the U.S. was #1 in cases. I believe that's still the case. And we really aren't taking this as seriously as we should. Moreover, for a few days, the COVID-19 crisis was the #1 killer in the United States. So our country is really not taking this seriously. And and now it's starting to do it. But again, the repercussions are still there from earlier inaction. And you can see how the cases shot up around the world. And this is slightly outdated. This is from March. But even in China, the cases are going back up again. And then we know that our daily rituals and just daily lives have been disrupted from schools being closed. And initially, the governor of Pennsylvania closed down the schools for 2 weeks. It became a month, and now they are closed for good. Pending further notice, schools have gone online. Non-essential businesses have been shut down or forced to move online. That means essentially a lot of the working class is without a job, and people who work at essential businesses are forced to deal with this crisis. So you can see Governor Wolf shuts down schools for 2 weeks. All non-life-sustaining businesses are ordered to close. Stay-at-home orders were issued to the hardest affected counties. So that was Philadelphia County, York, Lancaster, and then eventually it spread to all the counties. And then the order was recently extended to May 8th, and it's looking like it won't be lifted anytime soon. May 8th is more of a general date than a hard cutoff. And then we know the crisis is having a major impact. So not only is it disrupting our daily lives, but it's going to have a massive economic impact. So we see record unemployment. We see some of the largest days of unemployment, people claiming unemployment in the country, and really people are losing jobs very quickly, almost as quickly as the Great Recession. I'll show you some charts about that. It's likely that unemployment is going to reach 30%, and we can see that occurring right now. And if we look at it compared to past economic crises, such as the Great Recession, stagflation, the dot-com bubble, this is way, way worse. This is akin to the Great Depression, if not worse than the Great Depression. And then we know that this crisis is disproportionately affecting marginalized communities and working class communities and people in the front lines. So we already know that working class communities are essentially, people of color are more likely to get the virus. They're less likely to receive testing. They're less likely to receive treatment. Working class people are more likely to be working on frontline jobs. That means, working in Amazon warehouses where there's no protective equipment, working at stores where there's very limited protective equipment. And again, it's getting better, but it's still not enough. And people are forced to deal with, working in these horrible conditions where, they're likely to get the sickness, and, they're unlikely to get tested. And really, it's not a great situation for people who actually are supporting this economy when there's so little jobs. And really what we need to do is demand that these workers get protection. And then we know that the recent CARES Act, essentially what it did was it was the policy to provide $1,000 checks to people and small business loans. However, most of the money is going to be delayed. So in the case of the $1,200 checks, if you have direct deposit, you'll get them in a week. And they should already be going out. However, there's some problems with that, including that banks are taking the money. Some of the money is going to people who prepared your taxes. So like, say you do a tax prepared, basically if you go to a company to prepare your taxes, some reason they're linking their bank's account to the IRS, they get the money, and then essentially after that, that obviously was a mistake, but then they switched to checks. So instead of direct depositing into your bank, they used to give you a check, and it's expected that these checks can range anywhere from like 4 weeks to 20 weeks, essentially pushing some of these checks off to August. And $1,200 is not enough for the duration of the crisis. Some people expect the crisis will last 10 weeks. And that's how much the $1,200 was designed to last, was 10 weeks. But when you calculate that out, that is nowhere near enough for someone who lost their job and is working class and doesn't have the benefits of, a middle class job where their boss is able to still pay them. So essentially, people are expected to live off $1,200 a day, pay off their mortgage, pay their rent, pay for food, and live off $1,200 for 10 weeks. And then the small business loans, that was a decent idea. However, the government has already run out of money, and there's a lot of fraud with it in this, and a lot of the big banks are essentially just taking the money and not loaning it out. And under the CARES Act, which they just passed, there was a special provision for an inspector general, essentially to overview where these funds are going to and review essentially that and ensure that these funds are going to the most effective businesses. However, Trump essentially said, I will be the overseer. We don't need this special investigator for funds. And there's really no oversight. And really, there's nothing to prevent these loans to go into big businesses, so small businesses that actually need the funds. And one of the most grotesque uses of these funds is, so out of the $2 trillion, 500 billion went to loans, and out of that 500 billion, 50 billion actually, 50 billion went to the airline industry. And it specifically, to kind of like focus on how like grotesque it is Boeing, an airline company, recently spent billions and billions of dollars buying back stocks, essentially providing no material benefit other than increasing their stock price. And then they built a plane that they essentially rushed testing, and that essentially would crash if it wasn't restarted within every 51 days. It caused a lot of issues, and essentially all their airplanes were grounded. So they self-inflicted a lot of these economic damages, and now when the rubber hits the road, they want the government to subsidize their losses and ignore and essentially pay for their losses, but then not experience their gains. So if you look here, again, it's a way to basically allow corporations to get a ton of money without paying taxes. It's a corporate robbery in progress. The bailout doesn't include the limits that Democrats promised. The Democrats essentially promised that there would be limits and there'd be oversight, but they don't exist. And one of the most disappointing things about this bailout is essentially no progressive voted no. They all voted yes. Bernie Sanders voted yes. AOC, there's some rumors that she voted no, but again, there's not really any conclusion. And the really hard thing is they didn't take an actual vote. Like, they didn't take a written vote where people could, go back and see where they voted on. It was just a voice vote. So essentially, there's no way to tell who voted for what. And there's no one being held accountable for this vote, where essentially they gave so much money to corporations. So the Democrats really haven't done anything. And then essentially now what the Democrats are proposing is a bailout to COBRA, which essentially COBRA was implemented. It was a policy created 20, 30, 40 years ago. It really doesn't matter. But essentially what it does is when you're unemployed, essentially to keep your health care, because healthcare is tied to your employer. So as everyone's losing their job, they're essentially losing their health care. And what COBRA is essentially a way that you can keep your health care. However, it is extremely overpriced. And essentially what it is you're paying for your employer's part of the healthcare requirement and yourself. So you're essentially paying for what you traditionally pay, your co-pays, your deductibles, and then you're paying the employer side. And essentially, they are keeping up and they are maintaining this broken healthcare system that is the most expensive in the entire world and has lower outcomes than most countries. So essentially, they're pouring money into the system that doesn't work, and instead of directly paying healthcare providers, they're paying the insurance company to screw people over. And really, the story of this is they're waiting to send out another bailout, essentially to bail out their industries, because the Republicans have already bailed out their industries. They bailed out, the airliner industry, the fossil fuel industry, all their industries, and the Democrats essentially want to bail out their industries to help fund them. And one of the most telling and unfortunate things is you can see you essentially have the Republicans, being very corrupt, and then you have the Democratic leadership, such as Nancy Pelosi, going on the late night show, talking about how she's so thankful she can have ice cream during this crisis behind, two $24,000 freezers, and really saying how hard it is because she's isolated while people are losing their jobs left and right. And then the right can essentially message that, even though they really don't care about the working class, and essentially message that, no, they actually care about the working class because our Democratic leadership is so just abysmal. So let's move on to an actual policy that will help us. And this is the People's Bill. And one thing to note is this is essentially a set of goals. However, we must demand that this gets into policy. So just like the Green New Deal, which is actually a resolution introduced into the House, we need this introduced in the House because this will actually put pressure on these politicians. And I can tell you how we can do that afterwards. But essentially, the People's Ballot is 5 principles, and the one I'll touch on a little bit more later as it expands into the Green New Deal. But the first thing is health. So right now, testing is free. And there has been talks from Trump and essentially the Democrats about some sort of plan to cover treatment, but there hasn't been any really movement into actually covering treatment. Trump said in a press conference a while ago, like, oh yeah, the healthcare industry, they'll cover it, the insurance industry will cover it, and then like a day later, the healthcare industry's like, no, we actually won't, and they started freaking out, like the stock prices just suddenly dropped because like, oh no, we're not going to cover this, like definitely not. So part of the People's Bailout is covering all people, no matter income level, no matter race, ethnicity, background, no matter what, you get healthcare. You first get the testing. Everyone gets testing, because that's one of the most effective ways to track how this pandemic is spreading. So everyone gets testing, and everyone gets treatment, and everyone gets high quality treatment, and we're not funding this broken healthcare system. We're giving money directly to the doctors and the people actually, solving this. And this will be essentially a precursor to Medicare for All. Essentially, we're setting up a temporary Medicare for All system. The next one is economic relief. $1,200 is not enough for a 10-week time span where essentially, even if you're spending $5 on your meals, it essentially that equals up to the $1,200. So like paying for food, paying for rent, you can't do it. So essentially what we need is $2,000 payments, at least $2,000 payments to everyone on a monthly basis. So essentially rolling out a universal basic income during this crisis. And eventually that will turn into a sort of jobs guarantee, hopefully. But right now, since, most jobs, all in-person jobs essentially are shut down except for, essential services such as, growing food, grocery stores, and hospitals, everyone should be guaranteed a universal basic income to actually survive, and not a $1,200 bailout that will essentially, you might get it. If you're lucky enough, you'll get it within a week, or you already got it. And if you're unlucky, you might have to wait until August to get this bailout. So actually providing direct payments to people who need it. And then supporting small businesses and workers, and supporting small businesses and actually workers, and not, the administration staff. And obviously this looks different for small business than like, Boeing, where essentially the idea of the bailout for Boeing was to go to the workers, the flight attendants, and this was the picturesque version of it. But essentially, a lot of the money going to big businesses just go to the shareholders. So we need to ensure that when we do give money to businesses, that we're giving it to the businesses most affected, the businesses that actually are helping workers, that have high labor practices, that aren't making people work, without protective equipment, that aren't making people work for the same wages as they did without the crisis, and actually paying hazard pay, giving them protective equipment, and really incentivizing that, because at the end of the day, these businesses, they need money to survive, and we can use the power of the government's purse to essentially incentivize good practices. And then the next one is creating a regenerative economy, which is essentially expanding this program out to the long run, but I'll expand upon that in the Green New Deal section. And then the last one is democracy for all. So we need to expand vote by mail to every single state and every single county in the country and make that universal. So I think about a month ago, time doesn't really exist in the pandemic era, but essentially a month ago, I believe it was Wisconsin, they started vote by mail for everyone. And then the Republican Party went to the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, and they're like, oh, yeah, definitely, you can do vote by mail, that's fine. And then that went to the country's Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of the United States, and they overruled it. So essentially people who voted by mail after a certain period were just effectively cut out. And luckily in Pennsylvania, we have vote by mail. But before this year, we had absentee ballot, which essentially said that you had to have an excuse. And like, obviously you can make a really whatever excuse, but there still is like, there's probably some legal repercussions if you're caught lying about that. But essentially now we have vote by mail, and it's no excuse, you vote by mail, but not every single state has that. And especially the more conservative states are actively fighting them. And one of the bad things about Pennsylvania is now that we have vote by mail, and now that our primaries pushed back, one of the things they did as a provision was they're able to shut down any voting site without the traditional, going to a judge, having like a reason to do so. And there is some like merit behind that, essentially saying because of like the COVID-19 crisis, but we're lucky enough to have the vote by mail behind it. Like we have the backup. But other states are doing that. They're essentially shutting down the voting sites, and they have no backup, and they're doing it in the most affected communities. So communities of color, low income communities, they're effectively, yeah, they are essentially getting their voting sites shut down, and combined, they have to wait in line for multiple hours. That is far worse than, waiting in line for 10 minutes and possibly getting the coronavirus instead of, waiting in line for 4 hours and, getting the coronavirus. It's much more likely you'll get the coronavirus, waiting in line 4 hours and 10 minutes. So really the excuse about shutting down sites for coronavirus, it does make sense in some sense if you want to do vote by mail instead. But if you're essentially shutting them down and combining them into other voting sites, it essentially is completely backwards, and if anything makes the crisis worse. And at the end, I'll kind of share how we get this people's bailout and how we actually make progress, but I'm going to move on to longer term solutions. This is essentially this Green New Deal. So the Green New Deal, as we all know, is a solution to the climate crisis. It's a solution to prevent us from hitting these tipping points. And right now, both parties are essentially sold out to the fossil fuel industry, with the Republican Party being much more sold out. The Republican Party essentially wants to open up fracking, and especially in Pennsylvania, they want to open fracking up in state game lands, state forest, and essentially no regulation. Frack as much as you want. And that's usually the case for across the country. Now, sure, there's some, fringe cases where the Tea Party supports, like one of the founders of the Tea Party supports green energy, or some governor from Texas happens to realize the economic benefits of supporting green energy. But for the most part, they're sold out to the fossil fuel industry, and they take a lot of money from Exxon. And then you have the Democratic Party, specifically in Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf, which this is actually really, really funny in a really sad way. Essentially, they shut down a lot of construction because it's not essential. However, they shut down the pipelines, but then after the pipelines, the people working on the pipelines, the companies promised we'll do social distancing. They opened up the pipelines again, and there's actually video footage, and there's tapes of them completely disregarding social distancing and still pushing for, and still building these pipelines, which essentially will create, which will go to ethane cracker plants to create single-use plastics for Europe, and not even economically benefit us, but also contribute to the climate crisis. So again, you have Republicans completely off the rails, and the Democrats are like, yeah, we believe in it, but we're not. At the end of the day, if it hurts our bottom line, it hurts our bottom line. I don't know. So the Green New Deal is essentially the only plan to solve it. But today, I'm not going to really focus on the climate crisis. I'm going to focus on how it ties into COVID-19. So one of the major things is Medicare for all. So under COVID-19, and if we get the people's bailout, treatments for COVID-19 and everything related to COVID-19 as far as protective equipment and keeping yourself safe should be covered. Now, after COVID-19, essentially, just because you're not affected by COVID-19, just because you don't have that virus, cancer should be covered. Any cancer, any disease should be covered. And basically, due to multiple studies, essentially from more progressive organizations, or more conservative organizations such as the Mercatus study, which essentially is a Koch brothers founded group, which also is, they're one of the main deniers of climate science, but they found that even in conservative studies over 10 years, it saves about, $2 trillion, which is still a great saving, and it provides better care. So after the crisis, we still have to keep the quality of care we had, which will save us money and provide healthcare to all people. And we can do that by basing it off of, the people's bailout, and really just expanding upon that and really providing everyone with care, because it doesn't make sense to cover everyone for, COVID-19 and then just say, well, if it's not COVID-19, whatever. And this will really protect against future pandemics as well, which inevitably is going to happen with the rise of pandemics in the past, decade or so that people, when they get sick, it isn't like a choice of whether or not, like, oh, I don't know if I can pay for it. Do I really want to get tested? If I get tested, then I have to get treatment, and I have money for treatment. And this will really help stop the spread of future pandemics, and hopefully, hopefully, if everything works out, keep the time period, like the social distance, instead of, being streamlined to make it a little bit shorter. And one of the tragic things is right now, even under the Affordable Care Act, which provided provided Medicaid expansion and provided patient protections, it really didn't expand coverage. It did expand coverage, but it didn't expand coverage to all people, and it was unable to regulate prices because essentially the ACA was a three-part plan, which had expanding Medicare, which is fantastic, providing essentially a list of criteria, like you couldn't be denied for lifetime caps, you couldn't be denied for pre-existing conditions, but then it's of a government-run private marketplace where essentially private healthcare insurers could go in this marketplace, and essentially at the end of the day, the private corporations control the prices, and as it became less profitable for them, they would drop out, leaving essentially one insurer in this marketplace, and they could essentially charge whatever they wanted to because there was no competition, they could do whatever. So while the ACA is great, and while I respect a lot of people wanting to build it, we really need Medicare for all, and essentially to go to a single payer system. And one thing to touch on before I switch to another one is essentially the ACA was actually a Republican idea in the 90s to counter the Clintons' essentially universal healthcare. So individual mandate and all that stuff is from the Heritage Foundation. So really, when you're defending the ACA, you're defending Republican policy from the 1990s, which isn't the best. And then a jobs guarantee. So right now, I think the best thing to do under the People's Ballot is provide universal basic income. And honestly, extending that past the crisis would be fantastic. But I think another thing we need to do is provide a jobs guarantee. Essentially, we know that the U.S. spends billions of dollars on fossil fuel subsidies as each year they become less and less effective. So in a market economy, essentially when you have new technology, it's good to subsidize it to get it off its feet and really get into the mainstream. But fossil fuel technology has been in essentially, it's been in practice for, it's been in operation for the past 100 years. It does not need subsidies to essentially develop new technology. And a lot of these fossil fuel companies, they say they're researching green technology and they're really focusing on becoming green, but in the end of the day, that's like 1% of their budget. And right now, because of the climate crisis, oil prices and oil futures have dropped so far, and now they're starting to come back up. But yesterday, it was negative. Basically, a barrel of oil was negative, like they had to pay you. So like it was negative $30. So essentially, they had to pay you for this oil because they had nowhere to store it. And essentially, this is when we need to step in. And essentially, either there's two options. You can either really just go all in with subsidizing green technology, or if we're being really serious about this, we probably should nationalize the fossil fuel companies. Because at the end of the day, these fossil fuel companies are not going to do what's right. Their sole profit motive is essentially to destroy our planet. And at the end of the day, their 1% for green technology is not going to help anything. So realistically, we either need to regulate them extremely hard and regulate them essentially out of existence, or nationalize them. But the main thing is, and one of the things that the Republicans always like to harp on is like, oh, you're going to kill the coal jobs, you're going to kill fossil fuel jobs. It's like, no, we want to provide these workers with better paying jobs, with safer jobs, with cleaner jobs. And instead of working in a coal mine, we're going to get black lung, and the coal company is not going to pay your pension at the end of the day. You're going to take all that risk to feed your family and help and live a decent life. And at the end of the day, the coal company does not care about you. That is not a sustainable job. We need to provide jobs in a renewable industry where people are able to, build that regenerative economy, build the world we want, have pride in building the world we want to see instead of being, demonized, and where they're able to make a decent job. And this is really important, not only because of, the fossil fuel aspect, but because after the coronavirus, unemployment, it's going to reach 30%. And obviously a lot of those jobs are just going to come back. But essentially, one second. Yeah, so essentially, a lot of these jobs are going to come back. Like that is true. but not all of them are going to come back. And we need some sort of jobs guarantee to provide jobs to all people. So that's just kind of like an overview of how the jobs guarantee really will be the continuation of the people's bailout. And then the last thing is, and which I kind of already touched upon, so I don't really want to touch upon it too much, is that this infrastructure has to be green, because that is the future of our economy, and that is where we're heading. So essentially, I talked about that already, but a lot of people might be asking, so how do we get to this? How do we get to this? How do we get to this vision? How is this possible? This is impossible. This, we've never done this before. I don't see how we're going to actually get this done. Well, actually, we have done this before. And during the Great Depression, there was actually they had their own environmental catastrophe. They had the Dust Bowl, which essentially destroyed tons of farms. And that was because at the time, farmers were essentially participating in unsustainable farming practices, which essentially destroyed the soil, turned it into dust, and then the wind blew and essentially made a massive dust cloud, which caused massive environmental damages. And part of it was, there was nothing to hold down the soil, so there was tons of erosion, and at the same time, the stock market crashed. People were losing jobs. Unemployment was officially it was 30%, but it was much, much higher. And that's the same with this. It's going to be much higher than 30%. The official unemployment rate is going to say 30%, but people who've given up looking for work is going to be much higher. And FDR, one of his crowning achievements was passing the Civilian Conservation Corps within days of getting into office. And essentially, he passed this within days. It employed millions of people. And yes, there were definitely problems with this by not providing enough economic compensation, having the work being segregated. But essentially, we can use this as a model and improve upon it and provide, long-lasting solutions. So within 100 days, it was $9.5 billion a day he put into this program. In Pennsylvania alone, there was hundreds of Civilian Conservation Corps camps. And he used this to fight climate change and train millions of Americans how to be good stewards for the environment. And another thing he also did with the Civilian Conservation Corps is not only, rebuilding roads, building up infrastructure, and electrifying America. And it not only was the Civilian Conservation Corps, there was a lot of other administrations that did these projects, but he also trained these people how to read. He trained them in skills. It essentially was a skills training, reading, anything these people needed, and also a way to find recreation. So it was kind of like an overall encompassing program, which really sets a precedent for something like a college for all program. And one of the greatest things was 85 years ago, so this happened 85 years ago, FDR used the Civilian Conservation Corps to plant 3 billion trees, which, countries across the world are doing it now, but we need to get back into doing that and really fighting climate change. So all these policies proposed essentially are some sort of modification of the New Deal. And, some of them are different, like, college for all. Essentially back in the day, not that many people went to college, but essentially it's an extension of what happened before. So how do we actually get this done? One of the easiest ways, and again, not under COVID, like if COVID was not a thing, it'd be a lot easier to get this. You could strike, go out in public and strike, you go to rallies, but essentially all these in-person things are canceled. So one thing is going to the peoplesbailout.org. And they have a thing to sign your rep, to basically write a letter to your rep. Now, one of the things that I think we should go farther is demanding that our progressive allies actually introduce a bill. So it's not just this set of principles that essentially, it's easy to ignore principles, and it's less easy to ignore a bill. So demanding that your reps sign on to these principles and then asking them to, actually introduce a bill. So that's the first thing. And you can write about, the People's Bailout and the Green New Deal, and essentially tying in how, the People's Bailout is the starter, and then the Green New Deal is the continuation of this. And then some creative actions which, it's a way to get around like essentially the quarantine. Chalking, a lot of chalking is very easy. There's zero risk, essentially, just chalking like massive, like people, we demand a people's bailout, we demand a community deal. Making banners and hanging them from your window, hanging them outside, and really trying to replicate the rally atmosphere. And then one of the more risky things, but I think it's worth it, is spray paint. Just spray painting these signs on sidewalks, because essentially, at the end of the day, you might get a fine for essentially vandalism, but it's a lot less than actually like vandalizing something. And if you're smart, you can do washable paint and stuff like that. And really, if you're careful, you can spray paint and not much is going to happen. But that, again, that's the risk you're willing to take. You can either, it's anywhere from chalking to banners to spray paint, and really just getting the message out here. And really online stuff like sharing social media stuff. Like again, outside of COVID-19, a social media post isn't super effective, but if it's really coordinated, it's super effective. And essentially, I have a social media post that I can share, and I can post under in the Facebook comments or the YouTube comments, so you can know kind of like what to look like. But yeah, the main thing is asking your reps to introduce a bill, and you would want to target more of the allies, asking the general reps, like say Scott Perry, to sign on to it, and then doing some creative actions. So yeah, that's essentially an overview of the crisis we're in, the People's Bailout, and the Green New Deal.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Caleb. That was awesome. I'm feeling so inspired about all these things that we can do to start putting the environment and the economy in a connected battle that we need to fight and win. I would like to hand it off now to Peter, if you're ready.
Yeah, sure.
Sweet.
Thank you so much, Caleb, for giving that talk. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the great information and the call to action. I would encourage everyone to do what he's saying and take a moment to get that message out in your communities, with the people that but also in just your neighborhoods and downtown areas where you might be living at. I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about this later. We have another live stream that we're going to be doing at 7 tonight. But one of the things that I do, and my name is Peter Stone. I'm a resident here in New Cumberland near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'm a musician, I'm a software engineer, and an activist. And one of the things that I've been doing with the environmental movement recently has been hosting a series of concerts, obviously not during the pandemic quarantine, but before that, hosting a series of concerts that serve as fundraisers for a group called Extinction Rebellion, which is a group that works a lot in tandem with what Caleb may have mentioned, working with the Sunrise Movement. They do similar kind of actions, nonviolent direct action, like taking marches to the streets, doing things that cause economic disruption. Specifically today, Extinction Rebellion is focused a lot on Chase Bank. The theme of today is a lot around Stop the Money Pipeline. Chase Bank, just in the past 3 years, has loaned about like $250 billion out to fossil fuel companies. So outside of the realm of the quarantine, we were organizing actions that included like blockades of actual branches of the banks. Because of the situation right now, it's kind of relegated to making statements, online, flooding their Twitter and Facebook account and Yelp with reviews that are about their irresponsible funding of fossil fuel infrastructure that, when we need to be moving to a more sustainable energy infrastructure. So I'll be talking a lot more about this group. I think it's really interesting to do a lot of creative actions that I think we can learn a lot from here in Central PA. I'll be talking more about that at 7, but right now I'll also just take a moment to play some songs and give everyone a little bit of a break from speaking and information overload. So I'll play 2 songs for you guys. The first one is called All of Everything Erased. I love this song. I love playing it out because it's kind of taking a look at I think everyone who's watching this probably has had a moment where they've dealt with like intense fear about what could happen if we're unable to avert like the worst predictions of the ecological breakdown, breakdown of food systems and a higher frequency of climate catastrophes and all that. This song kind of takes like a hard look at that, and I'll just play it for you guys. It's called All of Everything Erased. Start. My pupils dilated, shock sped up my arm, shut my ambushed eyes, turn my face towards the heat. I heard the city choke, I heard the world at war, I prayed for providence, God said don't pray no more, you went and made your mess, keep your blame off my feet. So I got off my knees, I faced the devil's day. The sky was murder red, the streets were headstone gray. Flaming Ferris wheels spun where the sun used to be. I watched its buckets, bit bendings, saw a couple making love lock hands. And they're pushing for abandon and the answers it could bring. 90 million miles from the graveyard, growing over everything. I saw my lover chase through fields of sugar cane. She clutched her belly closed, whispered, keep us safe. They ground her down to dust. No more miracles today. So I dreamt myself awake in a resort hotel above the Golden Coast. Beside my southern belle, heard the sea reborn in each singing shell. Every coughing car, and every coiled snake, and every shrieking star, and every burning state, dissolved to atmosphere, all of everything erased, spread into a distant hum. And I drove along with everyone, and the earth grew green and nursed herself to what she used to be. All this senseless shouting calmed to quiet in her ancient memory. Oh, oh, it's such a joy to be free. Whoa, oh, such a joy to be free. Oh, such a joy to finally be free. Thanks. I'll play another one for you guys. This one is one of mine. It's called Susquehanna. Now, living here in Harrisburg. What's up? What'd you say?
Thank you.
Oh,
This is
thanks.
awesome. We're just
Yeah.
getting on. We're just getting close to noon, so I don't know if before you do another song, Johnny, if you wanted, or John,
Oh,
if
for
you
sure.
wanted to
I'll
talk
pass it
about the
along to
PA.
Johnny. He's got some important messages for us on switching over the source of the power in your home. So yeah, thanks for being here, everyone who's watching, and take it away.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the moment. I'll keep this brief. Peter, that was awesome. Caleb, your whole demonstration earlier was pretty cool and definitely empowering. I'm just going to keep this really brief. My name's John, and I'm just a local resident of the Harrisburg area. The primary thing that I have been focusing on, or at least sharing, is the idea of switching your electric supplier to 100% renewable green energy. So there's a lot of ways to find out about how to do that. I'll be linking a description above and also talking about this later today at the 7 p.m. segment. So it is a super easy thing to do, and it's actually incredibly important. So one of the big things is about divesting away from fossil fuels. And one of the biggest ways we can do that is by making sure the energy that we use in our house almost every day, especially a lot more now in this current situation, but how easy it is to actually switch over. So there's actually the standard offer program, which allows you to possibly even save 7% from the baseline of what your electric in your house already is. So you can switch to 100% renewable energy while saving money. And it actually only takes somewhere to 5 minutes if you have your account number ready, and you can switch online. So you don't have to call into the call center and you don't have to mail anything in. It's really easy to switch. I will be supplying some of the information and links where those links are available. But the biggest thing I can say for you to do is look into by going to PA Power Switch, you can check out suppliers in your area that are 100% renewable. And then by going into PP&L standard offer program or a standard offer program for your distributor. So it's all very easy, and I'll share that link. So just by switching and getting your friends to switch, it can make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. So important to think about the power that we can wage amidst all of the messaging that tells us that the companies and the politicians have more power than we do. We really do have a lot of power, and I think that's why it's really exciting to talk about divestment and the way that we consent to being part of the fossil fuel system and how we can actually choose to not do that. And it's really important that we realize that and think critically at a systemic level about how the money that the fossil fuel industry is making is not only putting our futures at risk, but also puts our democracy and our economy at risk. And all of those things for me put together have really motivated me to think about divestment and the bigger issues at play too. Why is our really not working for most people and not working for the earth? And what is a legacy of colonialism that we carry into the economic systems that we use? And how can we think about justice and retribution and reconciliation in terms of all the communities that live around the world? So at today, because the theme is Stop the Money Pipeline, there's lots of really cool actions and events happening online to learn more and talk more about that. At 3 o'clock is the Stop the Money Pipeline Town Hall at earthdaylive.com. And at 3:30, there's going to be an environmental justice town hall hosted by the House Democratic Committee on Natural Resources on Facebook Live. And then at 7:30, there's going to be a session about staying unified during a crisis in Philly. So there's all kinds of things happening today that the information also exists, and you can continue to educate yourself and engage yourself, but there's a lot of options to do things today. And I wonder if, Peter, you want to give us one more song before we wrap up, or else more if you want. We don't have to end right at 1 o'clock either. Peter, are you there? Maybe not. That's okay. So some other exciting things that are happening tonight. There is going to be Ziggy Marley playing on the Earth Day live stream at 6 o'clock Eastern. At 7 o'clock, Annie DeFranco is playing. And then at 9 o'clock, there's a dance party. I don't know if you've ever done an online dance party. I have not. I'm kind of excited. So hopefully that will be something that we can all come together about. And if you're interested in thinking about institutions, and like Peter was saying earlier, I think Chase Bank is really involved in a lot of the fossil fuel industry and how they're corrupting our economy and our democracy. But other institutions are doing the same thing. I'm a student at Dickinson College, and we have about $4 trillion invested in fossil fuels right now. And it's really incongruous with all of the values and the ethics that Dickinson loves to pride itself on. And frankly, like, educational institutions are not the only ones doing this. We have all kinds of foundations and museums that also invest their money in fossil fuels. And it just fuels the fire that fossil fuels are burning, of which the smoke is affecting mostly people of color and lower income people, which is not fair. And that same fire is burning our democracy and our future. So it's really important to think about what of systems are at play to the injustice and the destruction that we have going on right now, and also how we can kind of take care of ourselves amidst all that and take care of our needs as we are confined or stuck inside with COVID. It's really, really easy to be super overwhelmed by all of this stuff. I know I am a lot of the time, and especially being stuck inside without lots of friends to talk to and community to feel a part of, it's even harder. And so there's lots of ways that we can kind of continue connecting through these awesome live sessions, but also just remembering the ancestors that have come before us in this fight. There have been so many incredible movements and people who have worked against fossil fuels and for a livable future for all. And so that's something that helps me a lot of time in times of crisis and uncertainty and overwhelmingness, to learn about the history and really ground our in the moment. I think that wraps up our noon live stream. Thank you so much to John and Lara and Peter and Caleb for sharing your thoughts and your presence here today. It was really, really wonderful for me to get to see all of your faces and for us to share together, even though we're so far apart with the wider Facebook universe and YouTube universe, to really come together on this Stop the Money Pipeline Day of Earth Day Live.
Great job, Aspar. Thank you so much. And Caleb and everyone, it was excellent. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Woohoo! Go team!
And we'll see you all at 7 p.m. with Peter. Peter will be hosting at 7 p.m.
Yes, perfect. And I'll post the doc that John was mentioning in his segment into the Facebook page as well, in the live stream chat box. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you. Great job.
Thanks.